Welcome to Bedtime Whispers, where darkness comes to life and nightmares become reality. We had known Andrei Ivanovich Sarov for a long time. He and my father had been friends since childhood. They lived in neighboring entrances, and our move to the other end of the city did not interfere. Their meetings over strong tea became infrequent, but no less cordial. In my opinion, Sarov was an unusual teetotaler for a doctor, and it was no coincidence that I mentioned tea when talking about his meetings with my father. Unusual, if you consider his specifics. Andrei Ivanovich worked for many years as a pathologist in a regional hospital, and the medics of his profile, according to the stereotype, are some of the most ardent fans of firewater. So this big man with shrewd and tired eyes never allowed himself anything stronger than black coffee and tea. According to his words, clarity of mind and neatness in any case are the most important. All the more surprising for me is his unshakable conviction in the existence of things inaccessible to the human mind. But precisely because of his sobriety of judgment and what I myself have recently witnessed, I have no reason not to respect his views. Once, Andrei Ivanovich had to go to a nearby town on business, and since his car was under repair, he asked me to give him a lift to the train station. Electric trains go quite often to the place he needed. Having left with a little time to spare, we arrived almost an hour before the departure and decided to kill time by walking around the platform and watching people. We sat down on one of the benches and we were met by groups and individuals who were greeting promoters and passengers. Having interrupted in a half-word, Andrei Ivanovich suddenly changed his face, looking somewhere aside, and in answer to my mute question, pointed his hand to the strange couple. The pale lad in the untidy, crumpled jacket was being supported, with his arm round his shoulders, by a gaunt, barefooted old man in terrible rags. They were about to board an approaching electric train that was headed for the farthest villages in our region. I grinned understandingly. Yes, the boy has had too much to drink. He can hardly stand on his feet. His grandfather is almost carrying him on his back. I think there are enough vagrants like that in any railway station. And there is nothing unusual here, but Sarov, to my utmost amazement, cried out and jumped up from the bench. The people nearby turned to us, including the old man, and his companion, like a puppet, was turned to face us. At that moment, a hideous scar on the guy's chest, starting almost from his throat and stretching vertically down to his belly, as far as I could see with a hastily buttoned-up dirty jacket, caught my eye. His eyes were hazy and glassy, and his movements were jerky and awkward, like those of a sleeper or a drugged man. The old man supporting him met his eyes with Andrei Ivanovich and suddenly rushed to the departing train, dragging the boy behind him. They disappeared through the door literally in front of a panting Sarov, who was loudly indignant, ignoring the onlookers. The whole thing happened in less than a minute. Trying in vain to calm down my worried colleague, I set him back down on the bench and asked him about the reasons for such a reaction. Not long ago, a guy was brought to us for an autopsy, and the police never found out his identity. No matter how hard they tried, no personal belongings, no prints from the database, no missing persons report, nothing. Since there were no signs of violent death, the body was sent to us, to the regional office. While the police minded their own business, we went about ours, and then we found out an interesting thing. In the absence of any external injuries, the deceased's internal organs were in a terrible condition. They had almost decomposed, as if the corpse were more than a week old. At the same time, the skin, muscles, and eyeballs were preserved in some incredible way for us. And when you first look at the body, you could think that the person had died just a minute ago. This fact was of great interest to all the staff of the pathology department. And what's more, some people from the nearby medical institute came to wonder while the nameless beauty had been languishing in our freezer for 30 days, waiting for relatives or acquaintances who agreed to take him away. The law is the law. After that time, no one showed up, so we quickly decided to bury him, as is customary in such cases, in a special square for the homeless and the unidentified. And then the night before the day on which this guy, along with a few other unknown poor souls, was to be buried, Nikki Tian, the orderly on duty, calls me and irritably reports that a strange-looking old man is rushing into their morgue, screaming and begging me to give him the guy's body. The old man claims that he is his son and describes the deceased's appearance so accurately that there is no doubt that they are acquainted. And the problem was that the old man himself had no documents, could not and did not want to show anything other than the lousy rags, was yelling something about his right to the body, and was clearly not himself. When I was convinced that the police had already been called, I calmly advised the officer on duty not to worry and to trust the police. They would sort it out. When the phone rang at 5 in the morning, I expected to hear anything but what I was told. The guy's body was gone. I woke up instantly, rushed to work, and on arrival, I found the scene. Sleepy and angry police officers were searching the morgue and questioning the pale, shaking Nikitin for illegal actions with the bodies of the dead. A lot of interesting things came up in the course of the investigation, with the shoddy work of some of our pathologists, but that was irrelevant. And with our mysterious guy, the case was something like this. According to the orderly attendant on duty, partially confirmed, by the way, by the hospital parking guard, the old man showed up at 9 o'clock. He looked colorful. His long gray hair was hanging down to his shoulders in tangled strands. The color of his torn pants was no longer visible under the layer of dirt. He had some kind of vest with lots of threads and rags sticking out of it on top of his long shirt, and he was barefoot on top of that. He tried to go to the morgue, but of course they wouldn't let him in. He had no identification on him. Stopped by a reasonable question about the reasons for such a late visit, he began incoherently wailing and asking for the body. describing in detail the face and some of the deceased's anatomical features. The left leg had a crooked index finger, apparently once broken. A somewhat surprised Nikitin did not allow himself to be pacified and escorted the grandfather out, who looked a lot like either a bum or a madman. Locking the door and looking out the window overlooking the morgue courtyard, the duty officer saw that the stubborn visitor wanders around the walls, peering through the windows and continuing to anxiously howl and mutter something. Finally convinced that he was not going to leave, the orderly called the police and an ambulance, just in case. But when they arrived, the strange old man, as in water, unhappy policemen and doctors of the ambulance scolded Nikitin for the false call and left, and he, wondering why he summoned them, he could have handled it himself, went to inspect the rooms and offices. After a while, close to midnight, the orderly settled down in the back room with a late supper and poured himself a cup of tea in front of a small TV set. Suddenly he heard a quiet knock at the door. He thought of the old man and decided not to send him away just yet, to see if he would go away himself. But the knocking did not stop. As Nikitin said, it was very similar to dripping monotonously, with equal intervals of about half a second, as if knocking in thoughtfulness. Knock, 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 knock. The orderly jumped to the front door and opened it, getting ready to deal with the annoying visitor. But as he flew out onto the porch, he froze in shock and listened. There was a deathly silence, and there was no one near the morgue. Having walked around the building and looked into the nearby bushes, the officer on duty made sure that there were no intruders on the premises. Only an elderly parking guard circling the hospital grounds was smoking by the lantern that lit up almost all the space in front of the morgue, and watched Nikitin with interest. When the orderly asked about anyone who might have knocked on the door, the man shrugged his shoulders perplexedly and confidently reported that there was no one near the morgue, and the last thing he saw was a police unit and an ambulance leaving here. Judging that the guard himself would not have been able to run so fast away from the porch, the distance to the store was 12 or 2 meters, and the stout man of retirement age obviously could not set a record for running. The officer on duty hummed and returned to his place, firmly deciding not to pay attention to the hooligans. Having calmed down a little, Nikitin locked the front door, finished his interrupted meal, and sat down to watch a crime show. Behind the TV's noise, the orderly gradually began to distinguish the same monotonous knocking. This time it came not from the door, but as if from everywhere, filling the space and not allowing him to concentrate. As Nikitin confessed later in a private conversation, through the knocking one could hear a muffled voice, humming on one note, and this singing made me feel awfully sleepy. He passed out unnoticed and woke up abruptly at 5 o'clock and checked the entrance just in case. It was locked. All right. He walked lazily through the morgue, yawning, and looked into the freezer for some reason, just in case. He almost went gray. One body was missing, The unnamed guy was missing. Confused, he searched all the cameras in vain, and then called the police. They interviewed Nicktin and the parking guard, and this time they took note of the report of the strange old man's evening visit. What's the point? We don't always find children missing. And here was a not-so-new corpse without documents, and a grandfather who had never been seen here before. So we were not surprised when after 10 days we got a note that there would be no case. Maybe the case did not work, but I got more trouble. I had to go on this business trip, though I could do without it. And I never expected to run into the characters of this story right here. Wait, Andrei Ivanovich, I interrupted him. Are you saying that this very guy is the corpse that disappeared? Really? I would not confuse the stitch from the autopsy with any other, my dear friend. And I personally examined the body several times. Grandfather's appearance is memorable. It is easy to recognize him, even if you have not seen him before. If it's not them, who is it? Tell me. Looking into my eyes anxiously, the man nervously measured with his steps the small space between our bench and the edge of the platform. I was about to say something, but I was interrupted by the noise of the approaching train. We did not manage to talk properly. Andrei hardly managed to catch his train, but afterwards, during the usual get-togethers, the theme was raised more than once. We argued heatedly, gave various arguments in favor of the most improbable versions, but the mystery remained a mystery, a stirring imagination, inexplicable event that gives us goosebumps. Thank you so much for your attention. Subscribe to the channel. See you soon.